nous passions de la transformation à la mise en œuvre. Il faut passer des promesses à l'action. À Trinidad et Tobago, nous avons entrepris des réformes politiques pour appuyer la mise en œuvre de l'accord de Paris. Pas à pas, nous créons une architecture qui va nous guider vers une transition équitable et juste et un développement peu émetteur de carbone. Nous appuyons également les mesures d'adaptation pour protéger les personnes vulnérables face au changement climatique. Troisièmement, cette COP doit envoyer un signal très clair au monde entier, surtout à la jeunesse, qui doit être consciente que son avenir est en danger, à moins de suivre l'adaptation, le cours de l'adaptation qui a été établi par l'accord de Paris. Il ne faut pas se mettre d'accord sur le plus petit dénominateur commun. Il faut tenir compte des demandes justes des pays vulnérables pour leur accorder des facilités de financement des pertes et préjudices. Nous restons engagés à assurer des progrès dans le cadre de l'ordre du jour du climat, comme l'a demandé la Convention du changement climatique. Notre Premier ministre est venu parler pour s'engager envers davantage d'énergie renouvelable d'ici à 2030, lorsqu'il a donc pris la parole à la COP26 l'année passée à Glasgow. Et je pense que je puis dire que cela constituera la base de notre processus de développement. Cela va nous permettre de présenter notre NDC.
Trinidad and Tobago is on the verge of tripling its renewable energy capacity by 2030. Megawatts of utility-scale solar power, the largest in the Caribbean. As a small island developing state with an oil, gas, and petrochemical-based economy, the challenge to transition to low-carbon development will be significant. However, Trinidad and Tobago understands that the transition is an imperative more than a choice, and we are determined to meet that challenge head-on. We are creating the legislative, policy, administrative, and enabling environment to incentivize private sector investment in low-carbon technology. I am pleased to highlight that we are progressing on the establishment of a green hydrogen facility fully financed by the private sector. Moreover, at the national level, we have developed inter alia a national climate policy to guide climate action, which is now being updated to include the provisions of the Paris Agreement and the decisions taken regarding implementation of those provisions, as the national climate agenda is guided by international climate policy. A carbon reduction strategy from which the nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement was derived, and a long-term strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 2050. Detailed inventories of greenhouse gas emissions and identified intervention measures to reduce these emissions. A financial measurement, reporting, and verification system for greenhouse gas emissions being managed by the Environment Management Authority. I hope to take a cabinet note to soon formalize this system into a legislative framework to make greenhouse gas reporting and mitigation actions mandatory, and I expect to get the relevant technical drafting instructions from the EMA soon to set this in motion. A just transition of workforce policy to address issues not only related to retooling, reschooling, and reskilling the workforce in preparation for the inevitable energy transition, but to also address the displacement of livelihoods affected by the impacts of climate change. A national adaptation plan which details strategies and actions in relevant vulnerable sectors to increase resiliency and integrate climate change in the national development process. A draft e-mobility policy to catalyze the penetration of electric vehicles in the transportation mix. The finalization of the policy is currently underway after conducting some analysis to determine technical barriers and ways to overcome them. Importantly, We have also conducted gender studies in order to assess how these issues are to be considered and integrated into climate action plans, and we have carried out studies on vulnerability to climate change, including a capacity assessment for climate risks. Finally, plans are also well underway to developing a net zero plan for a second half of this country. Mr. President, a lot has been done, but we admit that we need to go further. We cannot do this alone. We count on the support of the international community to help us to further our national implementation efforts to tackle the climate crisis. In particular, we would welcome proposals from an international platform to assist countries in their just transition planning. We think that such a platform would be a useful forum for sharing experiences and lessons learned on these critical activities. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Maria Eloisa Rojas, Minister of Environment of Chile. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Chile is taking the climate crisis very seriously. For a country with high vulnerability like our own, it's crucial to take urgent action. The IPCC made it very clear. We are in a critical stage, and the decision we take today will determine the future of all humanity. Science says that 2030, in just over 7 years' time, we need to reduce our emissions practically by half. In that context, Chile, together with other countries, progressist countries, are doing our very best, creating management and policy instruments to cut our emissions as called for by science. So now like the hummingbird, whose life is affected by the fires, he does his part, so the Chile too is doing its part. In this spirit of urgency here at COP, we're launching a partnership to raise awareness as to the impact of global warming, in particular when it comes to the alliance of melting ice. That's a key area, we think, for a country with a significant cryosphere, so as we can raise the profile, the critical element of engaging in ambitious policies and aligning our policies in order to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees. Inaction could have disastrous consequences such as rising sea levels, effects which many of the community of nations will be suffering and which are already suffering. Chile, a developing country with a relatively low level of emissions, if we cannot count on collective action and cooperation of all parties, especially those who are developed, the goals of the Paris Accords will be impossible to achieve. This is a key decade when it comes to implementation. We firmly believe that concrete action, effective action must be taken at all levels, subnational levels, in coordination with all sectors to make progress. All those principles are reflected in the Climate Change Framework Law, which is valid from this year on and makes legally binding our commitment to be carbon neutrality by 2050 at the latest. In this sphere, we note with concern the lack of new ambitious NDCs, given the scale of the crisis we face, and we do very much urge the parties who still haven't revised their NDCs to do so as to close remaining emissions gaps. Transparency, too, seems very relevant in this discussion, recognizing the need for the best decisions are taken with the best information, and also through a stock take of progress in order to guide our decisions. Financing, as ever, is central towards making progress, towards meeting our goals, and here I'd like to call on the parties to empathize with all countries that are already facing the adverse impacts of climate change. Mr. President, Chile wants to be part of the solution. That's why it's our hope that at this COP we will achieve far-reaching results in all spheres that we are discussing. I'd like to conclude by saying that Chile is very much committed to protecting nature. We view the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis as a great crisis that needs to be tackled together. Nevertheless, all this is taking place in a social context where we need to make a transition that needs to be fair, where we cannot keep paying the historic costs we've paid, and where the benefits of our transition should also be shared equitably. It's only through policies of social and climate awareness that we'll have sustainable policies. Chile is working in that direction and urges all other countries to rally round in those efforts. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Mohammed bin Diana, Minister of Oil and Environment and Special Envoy of Climate Change of Kingdom of Bahrain. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bismillah ar-Rahman.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace and blessings of God be upon you. At the outset, we'd like to thank the Arab Republic of Egypt for hosting this important conference. The world has moved from proactive preparation to direct confrontation with the challenges of the environment and climate. We have witnessed unprecedented extreme weather events, including droughts, heat waves, torrential rains, and floods. The situation we're in today prompts us to stress that the Kingdom of Bahrain is committed to the provisions of the Paris Agreement and the pledges that it made in Glasgow in order to reach net zero by 2060. It is for that purpose that we have set a number of short-term goals to be achieved by 2035, these goals first are a number of national plans and initiatives, including the National Afforestation Plan, which aims to double the number of trees in the Kingdom of Bahrain to nearly 4 million trees by 2035. To this end, we're trying to plant 140 trees annually for the period 2021-2035. We are adopting sustainable agricultural techniques and selecting the types of plants that can adapt to the desert climate. We're choosing also coastal areas that are suitable for farming, and we are using also wastewater to irrigate trees. The Bahraini team was able to complete this goal with the percentage of 100% in 2022. In order to achieve the goals of the National Afforestation Plan, we are trying to double or actually quadruple mangrove trees by 2035, and we have achieved the goal of this year in this regard. It is noteworthy that we were able to plant the biggest nursery of mangrove trees, which includes 1 million seedlings. We also have a national renewable energy plan through which we're trying to cut carbon emissions and invest in renewable energies. We have also increased or actually upgraded our renewable energy goals to be 40% compared to last year. The Kingdom of Bahrain is not a major emitter of CO2. We only emit 0.07% of global emissions. However, we are keenly following the climate measures taken by or actually we are following the emission sources in the kingdom, and we also have identified the emission sources in 9 sources that are responsible for 80% of our emissions, and we are working to cut the emissions in all of these 9 sources. And indeed, we have made remarkable progress in this regard, and we are closer now to achieving the goals that we set in Glasgow. We are also introducing advanced solutions in carbon capture, storage, and sequestration, and also we are making progress in different economic areas, including in the non-oil areas. The Kingdom of Bahrain has also implemented a number of initiatives and projects in order to achieve sustainable development, including a number of eco-friendly projects, the National Investment Plan for Climate Change Adaptation, also sea level monitoring plans, in addition to a number of programs and contests that aim at raising environmental and climate awareness and spurring innovation in combating climate change in the Kingdom of Bahrain. We stress that all possible forms of support should be given to small island developing states and developing states in order to combat climate challenges according to the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. In conclusion, we wish you all success for us and for our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Romina Pourmokhtari, Minister of Climate and the Environment of Sweden. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, 1.5 degrees is not a goal, it is a limit. We have all agreed on this. At COP26, we kept 1.5 alive. COP27 has got to be the opportunity for us to jointly, as a global community, support each other in moving faster together. And Sweden will be a strong partner in this effort. As a young climate and environmental minister, it is clear to me what future I want to experience during my lifetime. A future of resilience and prosperous societies filled with green innovation and a climate transition that offers opportunities to people and societies. a society free from the kind of flooding disasters we have recently seen, such as the one in Pakistan. I have two key messages today: urgency of climate action and the opportunities it brings. The science is clear. We all need to set policies ensuring that we collectively limit temperature increase by cutting emissions by 2030. Sweden aims to be climate neutral by 2045 at the latest, with negative emissions beyond. My challenge to all of you is to get there before us. We need to drastically reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases and phase out fossil fuels. Our way of getting there is by incentivizing the innovative spirit of the Swedish business community. I am proud to see some of them presented here today. Be it in nuclear or renewable energy, energy efficiency, green steel, transportation, or the financial sector, their solutions not only drive climate action in Sweden, but also support transition in countries across the world. Policymakers need to go hand in hand with brave business leaders, demanding customers, and future-oriented investors. In that context, we were disappointed that parties did not agree to put on the agenda how to make financial flows consistent with the goal of the Paris Agreement. It is a missed opportunity that we cannot afford. The transition to net zero brings growth and new jobs, and putting a price on carbon is a key element. If the European Union can, additional parts of the world can as well. My country, Sweden, put a price on carbon in 1991, which is before I was born. Let me point out that combating climate change implies transformative action. It concerns everyone: families, companies, and civil society. The societal change is made possible by policymakers, but made reality by millions upon millions of decisions made by companies in board meetings and families at the kitchen table. The opportunities climate action brings will strengthen societies by making them more sustainable and more prosperous. And I hope to see this spirit of urgency and opportunity also reflected in the COP27 mitigation work program. Securing a space for jointly accelerating climate action in this crucial decade. We suggest the work program reflects and takes stock of the many initiatives many of us are engaged in outside of our progress, as well as progress in implementing the agreed phase down of coal and phase out of fossil fuel subsidies. Accelerating climate action also means delivering on climate adaptation, climate finance and averting, minimizing and addressing loss and damage, and we look forward to contributing to a balanced result across all agenda items. Sweden will continue to be a proud provider of finance for climate action. At last, let me also emphasize the importance of all voices being heard. Ensuring a space for civil society and human rights ensures our commitment to climate action. In order to create an effective and substantial growth in all of our countries, inclusion is a key in creating resilient and prosperous societies to people in all of our countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Se Samal, Minister of Environment of Cambodia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, the Cambodia delegation is highly appreciating the Egyptian government and the UNFCCC Secretariat for hosting this 27th UN Climate Change Conference here in this beautiful city of Sharm el-Sheikh. Thanks to peace, political stability, and sustainable economic growth over the last 2 decades, Cambodia is embarking toward a middle-class society. This has opened up new opportunities for Cambodia to address climate change as a responsible member of the international communities. At the same time, we remain highly vulnerable to climate change impacts. Despite being among the lowest emitter of greenhouse gases, Cambodia has consistently done her share to mitigate climate change. Cambodia was the second LDC and the first in ASEAN to submit a long-term strategy for carbon neutrality with a 2050 target. We have also updated our NDC. In the face of climate change impact, we have a strong duty to protect the most vulnerable in our society. We are investing in resilient infrastructures, turning our city into a livable city, ensuring access to basic and affordable services and education, affordable housing, food security, and decent wages. We have allocated 2.3% of our GDP in public resources for climate actions and incorporate more renewable energy in our energy mix. We are adopting a new national energy efficiency policy. We have approved a new pro-environment investment law, and we are greening our financial sector to promote private sector investment in climate responses. However, while we are engaging in this crucial fight against climate change, new challenges have added up in recent years. COVID-19 and geopolitical tension have wreaked havoc in the world, dramatically disrupting global supply chains and food systems. Energy and food shortage are impacting our daily lives. In this complex time, we must not lose sight of the urgent action needed to address the climate crisis, whose impacts are already suffering us with increasing losses and damage every year. Cambodia believes that mitigation ambitions must be further increased and action on adaptation need to be accelerated. The 100 billion per year commitment in climate finance to developed countries has not yet been reached and must be a top priority. At the same time, the structure of global financial flow is inadequate to address the need of most vulnerable countries and communities, and access to financial finance remains too complicated and slow for developing countries. The inclusion of financial for loss and damage in this COP agenda is welcome, and we do hope that rapid progress can be made on this issue to deliver financing on the ground for most affected countries. Mr. President, Excellency, and ladies and gentlemen, as the 2022 ASEAN Chair, Cambodia is initiated ASEAN Green Deal, aiming to guide ASEAN toward a green, low-carbon, and sustainable future. In addition, as the Chair of the ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change, Cambodia presents the ASEAN Joint Statement on Climate Change, which has just adopted by the ASEAN leader during the recent ASEAN Summit in Phnom Penh. We look forward to ambitious results for this conference, delivering the mitigations, ambitions, and financial resources needed to effectively protect our economy from the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and very good evening to you all. It is my pleasure to join you all in this historic city of Sharm el-Sheikh. I express my sincere thanks to government and people of Egypt for hosting this important event, COP27. Excellency, Bangladesh is an innocent victim of climate change as the country contributes less than 0.48% of the global emission. Bangladesh has always been highly susceptible to climate change and climate-induced disaster due to its unique geographical setting. Studies show that about 12 to 17% of the country, an area larger than many small island countries, will be submerged due to sea level rise by this country. However, Bangladesh strives for shifting the country's vulnerability towards resilience. The country has established a national climate finance mechanism, Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, from its own resource and allocated $490 million that supports more than 850 projects for making the country climate resilient. Apart from this, the climate relevant allocation in our annual development plan has increased by 2.5 times over the last 8 years, from $1.54 billion to more than $3.1 billion for climate adaptation and resilience building through construction of sea dikes, cyclone shelter, development of trees, tolerant varieties, and coastal afforestation and reforestation. As the chair of the CBF till March 2022, Bangladesh played leadership role in bridging the gap among developed and developing countries under their leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister, Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina. During our tenure, we prepared a climate prosperity plan to enhance our resilience and promote mitigation action in CBF membership countries. On 31st October 2022, Bangladesh submitted the National Adaptation Plan UNFCCC. In our NAP, we have identified 113 actions from 18 vulnerable sectors. $230 billion will be required to implement those actions during the next 27 years to 2023 to 2050. We need dedicated additional financial resources for the effective implementation of adaptation action identified in the National Adaptation Plan. Excellencies, despite being on the least emitters in the world and even with our limited resources, Bangladesh is pursuing a low-carbon development path with increasing emphasis on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and energy conservation. Excellency, at COP27, it is essential that we make progress on the following areas. One, addressing the gap that exists between NDCs and emission reduction required by the science to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius target alive, including finalizing the mitigation work program as necessary to reduce global carbon emission by 40% by 2030. Two, ensuring the mobilization and providing each year $100 billion from this year to 2025, finalizing the definition of climate finance and achieving substantial progress on new collective quantified goal on climate finance for for post-2025. 3. Request the developing countries to at least double their collective provision of adaptation finance by 2025 as agreed during COP27 in Glasgow, and providing support for the implementation of National Adaptation Plan. 4. Establishment of financing mechanism for averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. Finally, let us implement the decision of the Paris Agreement and provisions of Glasgow Climate Pacts to fight against the extreme threats of climate change and make the world safer and better place for our future generation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Lucky Halak Medina Estrad, Minister Secretary of Natural Resources and Environment of Honduras. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. We greet the presidency of COP27, official delegations and representatives of all nations of the world. Since the end of the 20th century, there has been a growing consensus that global warming and its consequences represent social and environmental changes whose origin is related to the capitalist production system and extractive models that have resulted in the overexploitation of resources, loss of biodiversity, rising temperatures and sea levels, ocean acidification, deforestation, plastic and chemical pollution. This aggressive model has put the well-being of humanity at risk, directly affecting human health and food security. Given its geographical position, Honduras is highly vulnerable to extreme weather events, which are becoming increasingly frequent and devastating. In 2020, hurricanes Eta and Iota left losses and damages with exorbitant figures that reach 1,765 million lempiras, which corresponds to environmental goods and ecosystem services according to ECLAC data. The country's vulnerability is also related to the current socioeconomic condition we live in, which is the result of the neoliberal model imposed on Honduras, aggravated since the 2009 coup and sustained by the drug dictatorship that for more than a decade tore the country into pieces and distributed it among a few. This distribution granted the management of our watersheds to private interests, allowed the deforestation of 120,000 hectares of forest each year, increased pollution, reduced our valuable fauna, and left the majority in rural areas without their livelihoods to subsist, thus forcing them on the painful path of migration. As a country, we have committed to promoting the recovery of our nation, the restoration of ecosystems, addressing it from a climate justice approach, recovering the use of our soils and building effective resilience. Honduras and the region have alternatives and solutions. We have experts and ancestral knowledge. However, we urge financial support to provide answers and increase socio-environmental resilience. We urge, therefore, that the goals of climate financing, access to technologies, and support for the development of national capacities that allow contributing to global efforts through a just transition in the social and economic sphere be met. Honduras suffers strong impacts from the current production and consumption models. One example of this is the problem of solid waste management and contamination in the binational Motagua River Basin, which is deteriorating ecosystems, biodiversity, local economy, and public health. But we can achieve local, regional, and global changes through the application of a rights approach, public policies, and incentives economic and non-economical, in the process of increasing the participation and resilience of the most vulnerable communities. At the national level, the Republic of Honduras has considered strengthening and updating the regulatory and institutional framework with a focus on social inclusion to work on reducing its vulnerability to climate change through national determined contributions, the Sustainable Development Goals, and long-term national strategy for decarbonization. Honduras has invested efforts in continuing with the refoundational task of caring for the environment. One of the greatest achievements is the Padre Andrés Tamayo Hydrographic Basin Restoration Program, with its own financing of $33 million per year, which will fulfill the goal sector to recover 1.3 million hectares of forest under the restoration approach in rural landscapes. The reduction of 39% of firewood consumption, and progress in the comprehensive management of solid waste. As a sovereign decision, we declared Honduras a country free of open-pit metal mining to prevent extractivism from continuing to compromise our natural resources and common goods. We remain firm in protecting the Rio Platano biosphere, the heart of the Mesoamerican biological corridor, a reserve of biodiversity and water for life. Mr. President of COP27, I wish at this moment, as leader of the coalition of 52 countries with tropical forest countries, to call attention to the international community on the non-compliance with payment for forest performance to developing countries, as agreed in the Paris Agreement. As you are aware, to date, the mere $500 million paid to tropical forest countries through the Green Climate Fund has only covered a minuscule fraction of the debt owed to 4 of the 52 countries in our coalition. Therefore, we urge you during your presidency to carry out all the corresponding steps so that the developed countries pay off that debt and we can advance more quickly towards the global goal of climate justice. As a country, we promise to support you in this task. At the international level, in a very short term and complying with the high standards of transparency established by this convention, we announced that we will close this year, 2022, as the only country in the world with sovereign forest carbon credits known as ITMOs, which will be evaluated at starting next January. It is transcendental for the administration of President Xiomara Castro to ensure sustainable development through the implementation of mechanisms and financial incentives for the transformation of our economic model, and to be able to achieve sustainability involving the public and private sectors, society, and the original towns, with sustainable projects aimed at generating green jobs in the protection of forests and indeed all ecosystems. I'd like to take this opportunity to reflect on coherence of all stakeholders. Life begins in the mountains. Let us do justice to those who, with their wisdom, have made it possible for the planet to stay alive. Let us recognize the struggles and dignity of our peoples. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Dixon Penakitasi Mua, Minister of Forestry and Research of the Solomon Islands. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Excellencies, I am honored to speak on behalf of the government and people of Solomon Islands. I represent a small island developing state in the Blue Pacific Ocean, which has the second highest exposure to disaster risk globally, as outlined in the 2021 World Risk Report. The science is unequivocal, and the impacts of climate change are clear across the globe and at unprecedented levels. Last week, a drought caused significant flooding that destroyed homes, food gardens, and transport infrastructure in my country. These realities confront us now and will intensify in scale and frequency if inaction and ambitions remain off target from the 1.5 degrees limit. We are in a constant mode of recovery from weather extremes that are driven by climate change. This is a burden that we are already struggling with, and we cannot afford nor wish to pass on to the next generations. We therefore urge the global community to step up, shift the mode of work to action and implementation. Our goal to remain within 1.5 degrees is reachable if global coal use must fall between 67 and 82% by 2030 and effectively stop by 2050 across all sectors. We call for a phasing out of inefficient fossil fuels subsidies and more investment to accelerate low-carbon development pathways and building climate resilience. Loss and damage is a key priority for my country. We must make a decision to establish a loss and damage fund at COP27 and commit to operationalize the fund by COP28 in 2023. Solomon Islands would want to see the mitigation work program operational as soon as possible and remind parties of the urgency to enhance ambition and action if we are serious about closing the emission gap. Major emitters must take the lead in drastically reducing their emissions. Developed country parties need to fulfill their promise and deliver on the $100 billion goal without any further delay. We need clarity on how and when the doubling of adaptation finance by 2025, as agreed at Glasgow, will be delivered. The Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and Global Environment Facility can only be relevant to Solomon Islands if they further simplify access procedures and deliver grant-based financing for adaptation that is fit for purpose and impactful right down to the indigenous peoples who have proven to be the most effective guidance of nature and ocean. Climate change is intricately linked to ocean change, and increasing risk presented by it threatens the health and value of our ocean, our economic prosperity, identity, and livelihoods. I therefore urge that ocean be given equal recognition and greater prominence in the UNFCCC. For us, climate change is ocean change. Let us not forget that beyond these walls, millions